I'm Noah, 32 male. I live alone in a small but comfortable city apartment, working as an architect for a mid-sized firm. For the last 5 years, every blueprint I've drafted for a client has felt like a practice run for the one I was designing for myself. A small, modern, sustainable home on a plot of land just outside the city. This wasn't just a career goal. It was the culmination of a promise, a family dream that was about to be shattered by the one person I should have been able to trust the most. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My life up until 3 months ago was built on straight lines and clear plans. As an architect, I find comfort in structure, in the logical progression from foundation to framework to finished building. My career is stable, my finances are meticulously organized, and my 5-year plan was right on schedule. The centerpiece of that plan was the down payment for a construction loan. I had already purchased the land, a beautiful half-acre plot with a gentle slope and a view of a creek, using my own savings from the first few years of my career. The house was next. It was more than just a project, it was a legacy. My grandfather had been a carpenter, and my father, Robert, a meticulous accountant who appreciated a well-executed plan more than anyone. The promise was made on my 25th birthday. We were gathered in my parents' cozy living room, the one my mom, Helen, had filled with books from floor to ceiling. My dad, ever the pragmatist, had presented me with a savings bond. "This is a seed, Noah," he'd said, his glasses perched on his nose. "You nurture your own savings, show us a solid plan, and when the time comes to build your home, we'll match your down payment. A foundation for your foundation." My mother had beamed, her hands clasped together. "A home you build yourself," she'd added softly. "There's nothing better." For 7 years, I held onto that promise like a sacred blueprint. I lived frugally, automating transfers to my high-yield savings account the moment my paycheck hit. I tracked every dollar, creating spreadsheets that my accountant father would have been proud of. I watched the account grow from a small seed into a formidable sum, $80,000. It was enough to secure a favorable construction loan for the modest but beautiful home I had designed. The bank had pre-approved me, contingent on the final down payment. All I needed was my parents' matching funds, the final piece of the puzzle. My sister, Olivia, was always the foil to my structured existence. 2 years older, she lived a life of vibrant, chaotic splashes of color compared to my steady monochrome lines. She was an event planner, or at least that was her latest venture. Before that, it was artisanal soap making, then a subscription box for dog accessories, then a short-lived career as a life coach. Each new dream was announced with breathless enthusiasm and usually ended with a quiet request for a small loan from our parents to cover the fallout. They always obliged. Olivia had a way of making her chaotic choices seem like bold, artistic risks, while my stability was often painted as boring and uninspired. "Oh, Noah," she'd say with a dismissive wave of her hand at family dinners, "still coloring inside the lines, you need to live a little." My parents, bless them, saw her as the free spirit they never were. My father, the accountant, and my mother, the librarian, had lived a life of careful planning and quiet routine. Olivia was their proxy for a life of spontaneity. They funded her whims, celebrated her fleeting passions, and gently absorbed her failures. I never resented it. My path was my own, and it was solid. I had their promise, and in our family, a promise was as good as a contract. A month before I planned to approach them, I finalized the designs for my house and got the final quotes from the builders. The total down payment needed was $160,000. My $80,000 was ready. I called my parents and told them I was ready to present my plan. My dad's voice was full of pride. "Of course, son, bring it all over this weekend. Your mother and I can't wait to see it." That week was filled with a buoyant, almost electric excitement. I felt like I was floating. I was on the cusp of realizing a dream that was a decade in the making, a dream built on discipline, hard work, and a family promise. I had my blueprints, my budget, my builder. The foundation was dug, metaphorically speaking. All that was left was to pour the concrete. I had no idea that my own sister was standing by with a jackhammer, ready to shatter it all. That Sunday, I walked into my parents' house with a portfolio under my arm and a sense of accomplishment swelling in my chest. The smell of my mom's roasted chicken filled the air, a scent that had always meant safety and celebration. But the atmosphere felt off. My dad was unusually quiet, his eyes avoiding mine as he fiddled with the thermostat. My mom was hovering, her smile tight and her movements jerky. Olivia was there, perched on the arm of the sofa, looking uncharacteristically serene. "Noah, there he is, the master builder," she chirped, her voice a little too loud. I smiled, trying to shake off the unease. "Hey everyone, I brought the plans." I laid everything out on the large oak dining table. The architectural drawings, the 3D renderings, the contractor bids, and the detailed budget spreadsheet I prepared especially for my dad. I walked them through it, my voice filled with passion as I described the passive solar design, the reclaimed wood accents, and the way the main window would frame the view of the creek perfectly. When I finished, I looked up, expecting the proud smiles I had envisioned for years. Instead, I was met with a heavy silence. My dad was staring at the spreadsheet, but his focus was distant. My mom was wringing her hands, her gaze fixed on Olivia. "It's a lot, Noah," my dad finally said, his voice flat. "A very ambitious project." "It's the project we talked about," I said, my confidence beginning to waver. "I've saved my half. I did everything we agreed upon." My mom took a deep breath. "Honey, we need to talk. Your sister brought some things to our attention. We're concerned." I turned to Olivia, who was now examining her nails with a look of detached pity. "Concerned about what?" "About you, Noah," Olivia said softly, finally looking at me. Her expression was a perfect mask of sorrowful sisterly concern. "Your behavior lately, this obsession with the house, the way you talk about it, the intensity, you're not sleeping, are you? You look exhausted." I was stunned into silence. I had been working extra hours to finalize the plans, but I was sleeping fine. I was energized, not exhausted. "What are you talking about, Olivia? I'm excited. This is my dream." "See, that's the word you use," she said, turning to our parents. "Obsession, dream, he's completely fixated. He doesn't talk about anything else. He's been like this for months." She looked back at me. "Leo called me last week. He said you were talking a mile a minute, that your ideas were getting bigger and bigger. He was worried you were heading for another episode." My blood ran cold. An episode. When I was 19, I'd had a rough semester at university. The pressure of my architecture program led to a bout of severe anxiety and a handful of panic attacks. I saw a therapist, got things under control, and learned to manage my stress. It was a single, isolated period in my life over a decade ago. Olivia knew this. She also knew it was my parents' greatest fear. "That's a lie," I said, my voice shaking. "Leo never said that. I spoke to him yesterday about his new job. He told me you were talking about adding a second story, a guest wing, things that aren't in these plans." Olivia pressed on, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "He said you seemed manic." My dad flinched at the word manic. I saw the trap springing shut. "Dad, that's not true. Look at the plans. They are modest, they are practical. This is a fabrication." "Is it, Noah?" my mom asked, her voice trembling. "You've been so single-minded. We just worry that you're putting too much pressure on yourself like in college. We don't want to enable something that could be unhealthy." The conversation was slipping away from me, spiraling into a nightmare of psychobabble and distorted memories. Olivia controlled the narrative, painting my discipline as obsession, my passion as mania, and my fiscal responsibility as a symptom of mental instability. Every defense I offered was twisted into further proof of my agitation. Then came the final blow. "Son," my dad said, finally looking me in the eye, his own were filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "Your mother and I have decided we can't contribute to the house right now. It feels like we'd be funding a spiral. It's too much of a risk." The floor fell out from under me. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating. "A risk? I've spent 7 years planning this. It's the safest bet I've ever made." "And we're so proud of your savings, honey," my mom added quickly, as if that would soften the blow. "But we've decided to use our funds to help Olivia. Her business plan for the event planning company is solid, and it's a much more immediate need. We're co-signing her business loan. It's for the best for the whole family." I stared at Olivia. Her mask of concern had been replaced by a faint, almost imperceptible smirk of triumph. She had done it. She had weaponized my past, twisted my greatest strength into a weakness, and stolen my future right out from under me. She didn't just take the money, she took my parents' faith in me. She had convinced them that my dream was a sick S, and her scheme was the cure. I packed up my blueprints, my hands numb, and walked out without another word, the smell of roasted chicken now turning my stomach. The first 48 hours after that disastrous Sunday dinner were a blur of cold fury and hollow despair. I didn't go to work. I didn't answer my phone. I sat in my silent apartment, staring at the portfolio of my life's dream, now just a collection of useless paper. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that I couldn't even process it in a linear fashion. It was a tangled mess of anger at Olivia, heartbreak over my parents' lack of faith, and a deep, humiliating sense of helplessness. They thought I was unstable. Olivia's campaign had been so effective that I started to question myself. Was I too intense? Was my dream an obsession? The gaslighting was so potent it was beginning to work, seeding doubt in the fertile ground of my shock. My best friend, Leo, was the one who broke through the wall of silence. He didn't call, he showed up at my door with a bag of groceries and a grim look on his face. He didn't need a key, he just used the spare I'd given him years ago. "I figured you wouldn't be eating," he said, setting the bag on the counter. "Your mom called me, she was crying, she asked if I was worried about you." I looked at him, my eyes burning, and what did you say? "I told her you were the most stable, determined person I know, and that if anyone was having a manic episode, it was the person who was inventing stories to steal your down payment," he said flatly. "I also told her I never, ever said I was worried about you to Olivia." She started crying harder and hung up. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. It was one thing to know Olivia was lying, but to have it confirmed by the one person she'd used in her lie was the first solid piece of ground I'd felt in days. "She told them you said I was manic, Leo." She used that word. Leo, a paralegal who spent his days knee-deep in contracts and legal documents, leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. "It wasn't just a word, Noah. It was a strategy. She needed to discredit you completely to justify a massive financial pivot from them. She couldn't just say her plan was better, she had to prove yours was dangerous." He was right, it was a calculated attack. We spent the next hour dissecting it, and with every objective observation Leo made, the fog of self-doubt began to lift, replaced by a cold, clarifying anger. My dream wasn't an obsession, it was a goal. My discipline wasn't a symptom, it was a virtue. Olivia hadn't just been opportunistic, she had been malicious. That evening, after Leo left, I was trying to do something, anything, to feel productive. I started cleaning out my filing cabinet, a task I'd been putting off for months. I was shredding old utility bills and bank statements when my hand brushed against a thick, glossy folder labeled Family Documents. Inside was a mess of miscellaneous papers my parents had given me when I moved into my own apartment. Copies of my birth certificate, social security card, and a thick, stapled document from a major insurance company. It was our family's life insurance policy. My father, being an accountant, had taken out policies on himself and my mother years ago, with me and Olivia as equal beneficiaries. He de-reviewed it with us once when we were in our early 20s, explaining it in his usual no-nonsense terms. It was his ultimate act of planning, ensuring we'd be taken care of if the worst should happen. I pulled it out, not sure why. Maybe I was just drawn to another example of my father's structured planning, a relic from a time when that structure included me. I idly flipped through the pages, a dense forest of legalese and jargon, and then I saw it. Tucked away in a section titled Policy Management and Beneficiary Amendments was a specific clause. I read it once, then twice, my heart beginning to beat faster. The clause stated, "Any request to alter the beneficiary designations, payout structure, or to assign policy benefits as collateral for a loan requires a formal attestation of sound mind and legal capacity from all primary policyholders. In cases where a primary policyholder has a documented history of mental or neurological health conditions, the company reserves the right to require a comprehensive, independent psychiatric evaluation to be completed within 90 days of the requested change." A documented history, my anxiety in college. It was on my medical record, a footnote from over a decade ago, but it was documented. Olivia had used it as a weapon against me, but my father, in his infinite meticulous planning, had inadvertently created a shield. He and my mom were the primary policyholders. Olivia had just convinced them to co-sign a massive loan by claiming I was mentally unstable. It was highly likely that, in her quest to secure her own financial she would have also tried to convince them to alter the insurance policy. Perhaps make herself the sole beneficiary to protect the family assets from an unstable Noah. Or maybe they'd need to leverage the policy for her loan. Whatever her next move was, this clause was the gate, and the key to that gate was a comprehensive, independent psychiatric evaluation. Olivia had wanted to paint me as mentally unfit based on hearsay and lies, but this clause required proof. It required a clinical, unbiased, and professional assessment. A sudden, brilliant, and terrifying idea began to form in my mind. She wanted to question my sanity. Fine, let's get a professional opinion. Let's get it in writing. The insurance clause was more than a lifeline, it was a blueprint for my counterattack. The path forward was no longer shrouded in a fog of hurt and anger. It was illuminated by the cold, clear light of strategy. Olivia had built her case on whispers and manipulation. I would build mine on documented, indisputable fact. The first step was to confirm my suspicions. I needed to know if Olivia had already made a move on the insurance policy. If she hadn't, my plan would still work as a preventative measure, but if she had, the impact would be 1,000 times more devastating for her. My friend Leo was my first call. "That's a brilliant find, Noah," he said after I read him the clause. His paralegal mind was already spinning. "It's an old-school provision, but it's ironclad. The insurance company is protecting itself from being sued later by a beneficiary who claims the policyholder was coerced or not of sound mind when they made changes. Your dad's meticulousness just handed you a silver bullet." "But how do I find out if they've tried to change it?" I asked. "I can't just call the insurance company. I'm a beneficiary, not the policyholder." "You don't have to," Leo said. "Think about the other side of the equation. Your parents just co-signed a massive business loan for Olivia. Where did that loan come from?" "A local credit union, I think." I recalled Olivia mentioning it once. "The one Dad has used for years." "Perfect," Leo said. "For a loan of the size she'd need, co-signed by retirees, the lender would absolutely want to see every asset the co-signers have. They would have asked for statements for savings, retirement accounts, and yes, the cash value of any life insurance policies. They might have even put a lien on the policy as collateral. There will be a paper trail." The next day, I put on the calm, professional demeanor I used for difficult clients and made a call to my father. I didn't mention Olivia or the down payment. I framed my questions under the guise of responsible financial planning. "Hey Dad," I started, keeping my voice even. "I was organizing some of my personal documents and had a question about the life insurance policy. I just want to make sure my own paperwork is in order for my estate. Could you tell me which company it's with again? And do you happen to have the policy number handy?" My dad, likely relieved that I wasn't yelling at him, was happy to oblige. He saw my question as a sign of the responsible son he thought he knew, not the manic one Olivia had described. "Of course, Noah, that's very proactive of you. It's with Northwood Mutual. Hold on, I have the file right here." He read out the policy number and I typed it into my notes. Then I pushed a little further. "Thanks, Dad, and just for my records, has anything with the policy been updated recently? Any changes to beneficiaries or anything? Just want to keep my file current." There was a slight pause. "Well, yes," he said, a little hesitantly. "As part of the loan agreement for Olivia's business, we had to list the policy's cash value as a secondary asset, and Olivia suggested and we agreed that it might be prudent to make her the primary executor of the policy just for administrative purposes, to manage things in case, well, in case we're not able." My blood ran cold. Primary executor. She was systematically writing me out of the family's financial future, using my parents' manufactured fear of my mental state as her justification. "Okay, thanks, Dad, that's all I need," I said, my voice tight. I hung up before he could hear the rage in my breath. Leo's theory was correct. The loan and the insurance were linked. Now I needed to find out more about the loan itself. This part was trickier, but Olivia's vanity gave me an opening. 2 days later, she posted a picture on social media. It was a selfie of her holding a set of keys standing in front of a leased commercial space. The caption was nauseating. "Big things coming. So grateful for my family who believes in my vision when others are trapped by their own small thinking. Girl boss entrepreneur new venture." In the background, partially visible through the glass door, was the name of the complex, the Willow Creek Commerce Center. A quick search got me the management company. Posing as a prospective tenant, I called and asked about available spaces, mentioning I saw a new event planning business was moving in. The leasing agent was chatty. "Oh yes, Elysian Events, I believe, very exciting. They took the corner suite for a 5-year lease, very ambitious." Elysian Events, that was the name of her company. Now I had the business name, the address, and the name of the credit union from my dad. It was time for the riskiest but most crucial step. I needed to see the loan documents. Leo advised me against trying anything illegal. Instead, he suggested a different route. "Credit unions have members, not just customers," he explained. "And they have oversight committees. If a member, like your dad, has a grievance, there's a process." "But you're not your dad. However, public records are your friend." He was right. Business loans, especially those tied to a commercial lease and a newly registered LLC, often have publicly accessible filings. We spent an evening combing through the county's online business registry. And there it was, Elysian Events LLC, registered 1 month ago. The document listed Olivia as the sole proprietor. And attached to the digital file was a copy of the UCC-1 financing statement filed by the credit union. It's a public notice that the lender has a security interest in the assets of the debtor. The statement listed the debtor, Elysian Events, LLC, the lender, Westbridge Community Credit Union, and the collateral. It detailed the standard business assets, equipment, inventory, accounts receivable. But then at the bottom was a non-standard addendum, including but not limited to assignment of interest from personal assets of co-signatories Robert and Helen last name, including the cash surrender value of Northwood Mutual Policy. It was all there, a clear documented line connecting Olivia's loan directly to the insurance policy I was a beneficiary of. She hadn't just taken the down payment. She had leveraged my entire future security against her flimsy business venture and was actively trying to cut me out of it. The paper trail was complete. It didn't lead to a stable business investment. It led to a meticulously planned heist. With the paper trail laid bare, my anger cooled and hardened into something more focused: resolve. Olivia had used a fiction about my mental health to secure her loan. I would use the truth about my mental health to protect my future. The insurance policy clause was my weapon, and a psychiatric evaluation was the ammunition. This couldn't be a casual chat with a therapist. It had to be unimpeachable, thorough, and conducted by someone with no prior connection to me or my family. It had to be clinical. It had to be a checkmate. Leo helped me research the best forensic psychiatrists in the state. We weren't looking for a therapist to help me feel better. We were looking for an expert witness, someone whose professional opinion could be taken to court if necessary. We found Dr. Alastair Finch, a semi-retired psychiatrist with over 30 years of experience who now specialized in independent medical evaluations for legal and insurance purposes. His credentials were a mile long. His reputation was impeccable. He was expensive, but I considered it the most important investment I would ever make. I liquidated some stock I'd been holding and booked a full-day evaluation. The week leading up to the appointment was nerve-wracking. I gathered every piece of relevant history, my university therapist's notes from 13 years ago, which I had to formally request, my academic transcripts, performance reviews from my job, and even a letter of recommendation from my firm's senior partner. I was building a portfolio of my own sanity. Dr. Finch's office was not the warm, inviting space of a typical therapist. It was stark, professional, and quiet, located in a downtown medical building. Dr. Finch himself was a tall, lean man in his late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you. He didn't offer platitudes. He offered a firm handshake and a clear outline of the day's process. "Mr. Last Name," he began, his voice calm and measured. "My role today is not to be your therapist. It is to provide a comprehensive, objective assessment of your current psychological state for a third party. We will conduct a diagnostic interview followed by a series of psychometric tests. Everything you say is confidential, but the final report will be a clinical document based on the entirety of our session. Do you understand?" "Yes, I do," I said, my voice steady. The interview lasted for 4 hours. It was the most grueling, in-depth conversation I have ever had. He started with my childhood, my relationship with my parents and my sister. I told him everything, sticking to the facts. I described the dynamic, my structured nature, Olivia's chaotic one, my parents' tendency to enable I didn't use accusatory language, I just laid out the pattern. We then moved to the incident in college. I explained the academic pressure, the panic attacks, and the therapy that helped me develop coping mechanisms. I was honest about my anxiety, but I was also clear about my recovery. I showed him my grades from the following semesters, which were excellent. I was demonstrating resilience, not hiding a flaw. Finally, we talked about the last few months. The house, the savings plan, the confrontation at my parents' dinner table. I recounted Olivia's accusations and my parents' reaction. Dr. Finch listened intently, his pen scratching notes on a legal pad. He asked probing questions. How did her words make you feel? Did you question your own perception of reality? Describe your sleep patterns and appetite over the last month. I answered honestly. Her words made me feel like the foundation of my life had been dynamited. For a day or two, yes, I did question myself. That's the nature of gaslighting. My sleep was disrupted for about a week due to stress, but it has since returned to normal. My appetite is fine. I refused to give him the portrait of the unstable man Olivia had painted. I gave him the portrait of a rational man reacting to a traumatic family betrayal. The afternoon was spent on the psychometric tests. Hours of multiple-choice questions, pattern recognition, and personality inventories. The Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, MMPI-2, the Millen Clinical Multi-Axial Inventory, McMyroman-3, the names were clinical and intimidating. The questions were designed to detect everything from depression and anxiety to personality disorders, and most importantly for my purposes, attempts to manipulate the test results. I simply answered everything truthfully. I left Dr. Finch's office feeling completely drained, as if my entire life had been X-rayed. There was nothing left to do but wait. The report arrived via a secure digital portal 10 days later. It was a 20-page document, dense with clinical language, but its conclusion was written in plain, unequivocal English. I read it in my apartment, the place where my despair had started, and felt the first true wave of vindication. The summary read, Mr. Noah last name presents as a highly intelligent and articulate individual with no evidence of a current mood or thought disorder. His past history of anxiety appears to have been situational and is currently in full remission. He demonstrates excellent impulse control, reality testing, and executive functioning. The subject's intense focus on his long-term financial and personal goals, such as the construction of a home, is not indicative of a manic or hypomanic episode. Rather, it is consistent with his high-achieving personality type and established history of disciplined, future-oriented behavior. There are no clinical findings that would suggest Mr. Last Name is in any way mentally incapacitated or unable to make sound, rational decisions regarding his personal, financial, or legal affairs. The final sentence was the checkmate. It was a clean bill of health sealed with the unimpeachable authority of a renowned expert. I saved the document as a PDF, a small file that held an immense power. Olivia had played checkers, making loud, aggressive moves based on lies. I had just set up the board for chess, and her king was cornered. She just didn't know it yet. The week after receiving Dr. Finch's report was a study in patience. I had the document, my silver bullet, but firing it wildly would be a waste. This couldn't be a furious email or a shouting match over the phone. A confrontation of this magnitude needed a stage. It needed all the key players present. It needed to be deliberate and controlled. The unveiling had to be as meticulously planned as one of my architectural projects. I called my parents and invited them to my apartment for dinner the following Saturday. I kept my tone light and conciliatory. I know things have been tense, I said to my mom over the phone. I'd like to clear the air, no big discussion, just have dinner, I'll cook. My mother, who desperately wanted to smooth things over, agreed immediately. She promised they would be there. My next call was to Olivia. This one was harder. I had to swallow my anger and sound neutral. Hey Olivia, Mom and Dad are coming over for dinner on Saturday. I was hoping you would join us. I think it's time we all talked. She was suspicious, of course. Talked about what, Noah? I'm really busy with the launch. About the future, I said vaguely. Family stuff, it's important. The bait of being involved in a family discussion was too tempting for her to resist. She needed to be there to manage the narrative, to ensure my parents stayed on her side. She agreed, her voice laced with the condescending sweetness of someone who thinks they are walking into a room where they hold all the cards. That Saturday, I prepped hard for the evening like a lawyer preparing for trial. I printed 4 copies of Dr. Finch's complete 20-page report and placed them in simple manila folders. I also printed the public UCC-1 filing that linked her business loan to my parents' assets and the life insurance policy. I placed these documents inside the folders, right behind the psychiatric evaluation. My apartment was clean and minimalist, a neutral ground. There would be no distractions. They arrived at 7. My parents looked nervous, bearing a bottle of wine like a peace offering. Olivia swept in a few minutes later, dressed in a sharp blazer, looking every bit the girl boss she portrayed online. She surveyed my apartment with a critical eye, as if looking for cracks in my facade. We made it through the appetizers with strained small talk. Olivia dominated the conversation, talking endlessly about her Elysian events, launch party, the high-profile influencers she was courting, and the vision she was selling. My parents listened with rapt attention, their pride painfully obvious. I just listened, letting her build her own stage, making it higher and higher. When we sat down for the main course, I let the silence settle for a moment before I spoke. I'm glad we could all do this, I began, my voice calm and even. I invited you here because something happened a few weeks ago that needs to be addressed directly. 3 sets of eyes turned to me. My dad looked weary, my mom anxious. Olivia had a slight, bored smile on her face, ready to swat down whatever complaint I was about to raise. As you know, I continued, looking from my mother to my father, you raised concerns about my mental health based on things Olivia told you. You believed I was having a manic episode and was mentally unstable. This belief led you to break a 7-year promise to me and instead co-sign a significant business loan for Olivia. Noah, please don't start this again, my mom said, her voice pleading. I'm not starting anything, I replied gently. I'm finishing it. I stood up, walked over to my briefcase, and retrieved the 4 manila folders. I placed one in front of my father, one in front of my mother, and one in front of Olivia. I kept the last one for myself. You questioned my stability based on hearsay and deliberate misinformation, I said, my gaze fixed on Olivia. I decided it was a fair question, so I sought a professional, clinical, and definitive answer. Olivia's smile faltered. She looked down at the folder, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. My father, ever the man of documents and data, opened his immediately. My mother followed suit a moment later. What you have in front of you, I explained, is a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation conducted by Dr. Alastair Finch, one of the top forensic psychiatrists in the state. I'd like you to read the summary on the final page, please. The only sound in the room was the rustle of paper. I watched my father's eyes scan the page, his brow furrowed in concentration. I saw his expression shift from skepticism to shock and then to a dawning, horrified understanding. My mother's hand went to her mouth and her eyes welled up with tears. She looked from the page to me, her face a mask of regret. But it was Olivia's reaction that I was waiting for. She read the conclusion, her face paling. The color drained from her cheeks. The confident, serene mask she wore cracked and fell away, revealing the raw panic beneath. "This is ridiculous," she stammered, tossing the folder onto the table. "You paid some doctor to write what you wanted. His reputation is impeccable, Olivia, and his findings are based on 6 hours of clinical testing, not on gossip," I said coolly. "But that's not all that's in the folder. Behind that report, you'll find a copy of the UCC-1 financing statement for Elysian Events, LLC. It's a public document." My dad, already reeling, flipped the page. He saw the document linking his name, my mother's name, and the life insurance policy directly to Olivia's loan. He understood immediately. "You also told them," I said, my voice dropping but gaining an edge of steel, "to make you the primary executor of the policy. An action which, according to the policy's own terms, would have been flagged due to my documented history from college. It would have triggered a mandatory request for the very evaluation you are now holding. You were going to be exposed by Dad's own meticulous planning eventually. I just sped up the process." I finally looked my parents in the eye. "You were manipulated. She preyed on your fears and your love for her to defraud me and entangle you in a risky financial venture backed by every asset you have. She didn't just lie. She committed fraud. She misrepresented my mental state to a financial institution's co-signatories to secure a loan. I wonder what the Westbridge Community Credit Union's ethics board would think of that." The room was utterly silent. The truth, in all its documented clinical and legal ugliness, was laid bare on the table between us. Olivia was trapped. There were no more lies to tell, no more emotional strings to pull. There was only the paper. There was only the proof. The unveiling was complete. The silence that followed the unveiling was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and warmth out of the room. Olivia sat frozen, her face a marble statue of disbelief and fury. My mother was openly weeping, her quiet sobs the only sound. But it was my father's reaction that struck me the most. He was a man of numbers and ledgers, of right and wrong columns. He stared at the documents in front of him, the clinical proof of my stability next to the legal proof of his liability, and I could see him processing the information not as a father, but as the accountant he used to be. He was running a balance sheet of the last month, and the deficit was catastrophic. He was the first to speak. His voice was low, gravelly, and stripped of all emotion. "Olivia, is this true? Did you lie to us about Noah's conversation with Leo?" Olivia, cornered and exposed, did the only thing she could. She lashed out. "He's twisting everything. You always take his side. I did what I had to do for my business. My dreams are just as important as his stupid house." "Your dreams," my father repeated, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. He slowly closed the folder and pushed it to the center of the table. "You used a lie about your brother's health to secure our retirement savings as collateral. You didn't just ask for help, you set a trap." He looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw not a gullible parent but my father, the man who taught me the value of integrity. His eyes were filled with a profound, gut-wrenching shame. "Noah," he said, his voice cracking, "I am so sorry." That was all I needed to hear from him. My mother echoed his sentiment through her tears, apologizing over and over. The anger I had been holding onto for weeks began to dissolve, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. The confrontation ended with Olivia storming out, shouting that we had ruined everything. My parents stayed for another hour. We didn't talk much. They just sat there, absorbing the magnitude of the deception. Before they left, my dad put his hand on my shoulder. "We will fix this," he said. It wasn't a promise to me. It was a statement of intent. And fix it he did. The next Monday, my father, armed with the evaluation and the loan documents, met with the manager of the credit union. I wasn't there, but my dad told me everything later. He didn't go in yelling. He went in as Robert, last name, a 30-year member and a retired accountant. He laid out the case for fraudulent inducement, how they were induced to co-sign the loan based on a material misrepresentation of another family member's stability, which directly impacted their financial decisions. He pointed out that Olivia's business plan, which the loan officer had approved, was likely predicated on these same falsehoods. The credit union, faced with a potential lawsuit from a long-standing member and the PR nightmare of having funded a business based on such a toxic deception, moved quickly to mitigate the situation. They froze Olivia's business account. They called in her loan, citing irregularities in the application process. Without my parents' backing, she had no assets and no case. Her Elysian events was over before it began. She was forced into a settlement to repay the initial funds the bank had already disbursed, leaving her not at square one, but in a deep financial hole of her own making. My parents were formally removed as co-signers, their assets and the life insurance policy freed from her grasp. Our family is different now. The trust, once a solid foundation, is now a landscape of fault lines. Olivia and I do not speak. She moved to another city a few months later, and I only hear about her through the strained silence in my parents' voices when her name comes up. The relationship with my parents is rebuilding slowly. It's not what it was. The easy faith has been replaced by a more deliberate, careful respect. They see me now not as their fragile son, but as the man I have become, resilient, capable, and unshakable in my convictions. 2 months ago, my father called me. He told me he and my mother had transferred $80,000 to my savings account. "It's not a gift, Noah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a debt being paid. It's the promise. We know it's late." I accepted it, not because I needed it anymore. I had already reworked my budget and secured a smaller, more modest loan on my own, but because we all needed the promise to be fulfilled. It was the only way to truly close that chapter. I am writing this from the small site office on my plot of land. The foundation of my home was poured last week. The wooden frame is going up, Tom. Oro, it's a slightly different design now, a little smaller, a little more efficient. I drew up new blueprints after everything happened. The lines are cleaner, the structure more honest. It's a house built not on a naive promise but on a hard-won truth. Every time I look at it, I'm reminded that the strongest foundations aren't the ones that are never tested. They're the ones that are shattered and then meticulously, carefully, and honestly rebuilt.